Hey, this is Matt Woods with First Alert 4. Thanks for tuning into this podcast. A few disclaimers before you listen. This series discusses sexual assault and contains language some may find offensive. Listener discretion is advised. It was a Saturday evening in June when my phone rang with a number that I didn't recognize. It was from the 573 area code that covers southeast Missouri. I let it go to voicemail. Probably spam, I thought. Then I saw I had another missed call from the number. A few minutes later, it showed up again. So that time, I finally answered. And then I heard this prompt.
This call is from a correctional facility and may be monitored and recorded.
I didn't know who it was, but I went ahead and answered the call anyway.
Thank you for using Securus. You may start the conversation now.
The man on the other line said his name was Fredrico Lowe-Bey. In 1988, he was convicted of raping and sodomizing a woman just before sunrise in a South St. Louis alley. As a 26-year-old man, he was sentenced to 85 years in prison without the possibility of parole. He was going to die in the Missouri Department of Corrections. But he proceeded to claim to me in that phone call that he was an innocent man. He would tell me that the DNA from the crime scene was not his, that two cops who he previously filed an internal affairs complaint against investigated him for this rape. He also kept bringing up a medical report that had important information he never saw until 26 years after he was convicted. This is from one of our conversations. Please excuse the prison phone call quality.
The whole thing is they did not want to get caught with this medical report. This medical report is a linchpin, man, to my conviction or me getting released out of prison.
There were times he got intense and emotional after talking a while about the case.
They destroyed my fucking whole family, man. This is what don't nobody get. And this crazy shit that they continue to say about this evidence, that medical report, that was the main key to them not letting me out of prison, man. I'm telling you, man.
I didn't know anything about the case, and I also didn't know if anything he was telling me was true. I told him that I'd do a little research and we could talk again. It's hard to tell at first whether something like this will lead to a story. It seemed like at least Fredrico was willing to talk about the case, but I needed to know who else was involved, if they would be willing to speak with me about it, and were they even still alive. This case was tried 37 years ago. Ronald Reagan was president that year.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Billboard magazine's top song was Faith by George Michael. So it was certainly going to be a challenge to unearth sources, if they were even willing to talk. Fredrico ended up mailing me some documents that he wanted me to look at, like DNA results and post-conviction hearing transcripts, affidavits, medical reports. It was scratching the surface of the case. I felt like I had 10 pieces of a 1,000-piece puzzle, and none of them fit together at the time. But what Fredrico was sending me and telling me in phone calls was at the very least compelling. The case had gotten some public attention here and there. KMOV actually ran a story in 2009 about it. A judge had just denied Fredrico's exoneration even though DNA excluded him as the sperm contributor. They interviewed his public defender, a guy named Scott Thompson.
I think that he's still in prison because we were never able to produce an actual person, an actual name to give to the court to say, okay, this is whose DNA it really is.
So why should you have to produce the other person if indeed it is not Mr. Lowe-Bey's?
I don't think we should.
But overall, the exposure has been sparse. One woman, Jamala Rogers, has been involved since the year after Fredrico got convicted. He sent her a letter, and she's been advocating for him ever since. We met at her community center in St. Louis's Hamilton Heights neighborhood to talk about the case. She said some people claiming innocence behind bars have accepted their fate. Fredrico was not one of those people.
Some of those people have resigned themselves to the fact that nothing's going to happen. They're innocent, but they're going to be stuck there. That's a different kind of person because they've accepted their fate. But there's others like Fredrico Lowe-Bey that says, every waking moment, every breath I take is going to be devoted to me getting out of here, proving my innocence and seeing my family again and that's what it's going to be all about.
Rogers founded the Organization for Black Struggle in the 1980s. She's a very progressive-minded person, and a big part of her focus is criminal justice. She was willing to advocate for Fredrico, but for him to have a real chance at exoneration, he needed lawyers that he couldn't personally afford to pay. In addition to Rogers, he also reached out to a nonprofit that works to free people from prison it believes are innocent. It wasn't the only one he reached out to, but this one said yes. It's called Centurion Ministries, based out of Princeton, New Jersey. They agreed to take on Fredrico's case. That gave him a fighting chance. Jim McCloskey founded Centurion in the early 80s. He retired a few years ago, but he agreed to talk to me about Fredrico. We talked over the phone since he's based on the East Coast. Right away, I could tell how passionate he was about the work.
You have in your hands the case of a completely innocent man. Fredrico Lowe-Bey had absolutely nothing to do with his sexual assault. He's never done any kind of a crime like this in his life. And in my view, he was literally framed by the St. Louis police.
Centurion's involvement helped reveal some key facts in the case that have been central to Fredrico's claim of innocence. They paid for DNA testing, which showed Fredrico's DNA was not on the victim. They discovered a copy of a medical report that cast doubt on critical witness testimony. And they would argue that the officers investigating him were impartial because Fredrico had filed an internal affairs complaint against them. But since being convicted, Fredrico has been denied at almost every turn. The chronicle of events haven't gone in his favor either. DNA testing wasn't a thing in 1988 besides maybe testing for blood type. After testing conclusively excluded him as the contributor 17 years after his conviction, a judge ruled that it wasn't enough to prove his innocence. 7 years after that ruling, an unblemished copy of the medical report that was never seen by Fredrico or his defense contained information that called the state's entire narrative into question. And they've never been able to argue the entire case with everything that's come out after the trial to a judge. The previous St. Louis Circuit Attorney, Kim Gardner, vowed to review the case, but it never went anywhere. She resigned in 2023 amid political and public pressure. But in May 2024, there appeared one last glimmer of hope. The current St. Louis Circuit Attorney's Office announced it was going to review the case. And the stakes are high. This is a Hail Mary by all means. Every legal remedy has been exhausted besides the Circuit Attorney's review. A 2021 Missouri law allowed prosecutors to file motions to vacate convictions based on actual innocence. It's led to 4 people being freed in Missouri after spending decades behind bars for crimes they didn't do. There are still several steps that would need to happen for the Circuit Attorney's Office to try and vacate this conviction. They wouldn't talk about specifics of the case, but said it's currently in the review process. No formal decision has been made. With that hanging in the balance and the unanswered questions in this case, I decided that I wanted to make it a matter of public record. What I can do as a journalist is lay out the facts and try to land as close to the truth as possible. It took months of interviews with Fredrico, his lawyers, people that knew him, people who spent time in prison with him, and people who testified and gave sworn statements either at trial or in the years after his conviction. I've read thousands of pages of documents from the trial transcripts, post-conviction hearings, and also the state's effort to uphold a conviction. Fredrico Lowe-Bey has one last shot at proving what he's maintained since the day he was arrested for rape, that he's an innocent man sentenced to die in prison. From First Alert 4, I'm Matt Woods, and this is Burden of Proof, one man's fight to show he's innocent. This is a true story about how difficult it is to prove actual innocence after a jury has declared you guilty. While most of the prisoners at Crossroads Correctional Center spent time in the yard during the day, There were a few who preferred the silence of the library over the sunshine. One young man at the prison in the late 90s went to the quiet room with books from floor to ceiling looking for advice.
Just stay close to the mic. Yep. This a podcast or?
That's the voice of Bobby Bostic. He met Fredrico Lowe-Bey while they were both serving time at Crossroads.
There was only 3 maximum security prisons. You had to have 30 years or more to be at a maximum security prison. So, I had 241 years.
You heard that right. 241 years. Bostic committed an armed robbery when he was 16, and the judge tried to make an example out of him. He got out in 2022 because of a law allowing juveniles to get parole after 15 years. By the time the law went into effect, he had already served 26. Bostic was the first person to tell me about Fredrico. They didn't know each other well, but Bostic said he looked up to him while they were in prison.
He would be one of those studious inmates that was always in the law library, always trying to fight to get out of prison. And me personally, with the 241 years, I found myself hanging around older guys because I wanted to learn the law. And those guys were jailhouse scholars. They was legal scholars. They knew everything about the law, but they couldn't get themselves out of prison. And I still wanted to learn from them because they knew what I didn't know. And I knew the only way out of prison was to study the law.
Bostic painted a picture of a man who was determined to get out of prison.
He was one of those guys that fought constantly. Every time you seen him, he got a big folder in his hand with law stuff. This is how he walked the yard. This how serious getting out of prison is for guys like him.
Bostic had an uphill battle in his fight for freedom. He was guilty of the crime he was convicted of. Back then, he assumed Fredrico was going to get out because he spent so much time studying the law. Bostic said it wasn't just Fredrico professing his innocence. Other inmates believed it too.
It's a difference between somebody saying they're innocent versus people in our environment saying somebody innocent. With him, it was like guys like, man, dude, innocent. He finna get out.
So you've heard from other guys in prison. They were saying, "Oh, this guy, he is innocent. He's trying to make his way out." You heard that from other guys.
Yeah, that's before I even knew him per se.
Fredrico Lowe-Bey grew up in the Peabody housing projects near downtown St. Louis. His family moved to St. Louis's Shaw neighborhood when he was in his late teens. He took boxing classes as a kid. He said he trained under a guy named Kenny Lohr. Lohr was a local legend in the boxing community. He's in the St. Louis Sports Hall of Fame. Fredrico told me he wanted to be a firefighter back in the day, but he got involved in selling drugs and committing other crimes like robberies and stealing cars.
I was supposed to be going to the fire academy to become a firefighter, and I messed it up. I messed it up trying to be something that I wasn't.
What do you mean by that?
I got locked up.
He said he was a product of his environment, that if he and his friends knew better, they would have done better. He said they were a nuisance to the community. The lifestyle led to a contentious relationship with the police. They hung around the south side of St. Louis in the city's 3rd policing district. I met with Tony Atkins, who grew up with Fredrico. Tony, how you doing?
All right.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for talking to me
problem.
over the phone. Atkins has known Fredrico since they were about 14 years old. He's got a slender face with scruffy facial hair around his chin and lips. He had on a plain white t-shirt and a Cardinals baseball hat. We sat at his kitchen table, and he told me about the lifestyle that he, Fredrico, and their other friends lived back in the 80s.
And we was just those guys that these police didn't like. I mean, we was bad. I ain't gonna say bad guys. We got into trouble, and we was, you want to say, stealing cars or, things like that as teenagers.
He said they eventually stopped doing robberies and stealing cars, what he called the stupid stuff. They started selling drugs as a way to make money, but also lay low. They kept track of police shifts to stay out of certain officers' way. Atkins used to live with his grandma on Shaw Boulevard. He said once he crossed under Highway 44 coming into the neighborhood, that meant run-ins with the 3rd District cops.
Police waiting on that end, and you run into them. Next thing you know, we got it. Got what, man? What you mean? And you just seen you throw the gun. We was on gun, dope, teas and blues. You hit. You by yourself. Police, you hit. The record bad. It'll stick. You in 100 yards of the drugs. That's yours. And that's how most of us caught our cases.
Atkins told me Fredrico was especially disliked by the police.
Fred was just the most wanted son of a gun. I mean, the way he talked to him, kiss my ass, and he'll try to fight him. And man, Fred was a lovable guy, but a hateable guy. Because he didn't take no shit off the police or nobody else. He'll try to fight them. He'll talk, tired of locking them up. So that's why Fred would act the way he act with them. Put your hands, fuck you this and that. You take your hands off, he take it. Fred gonna take an ass whoop.
Fredrico's other friend, Stephen Whitfield, told me something similar.
Yeah, they didn't like Fred. Because Fred was aggressive with police. Whenever he came in contact with police, it's always a contact, a verbal thing, or sometimes it might be lead to a physical thing. Fred just despised police. With the average guy would mostly try to respect them and respect what they did. I ain't had no problem with them being the police. I looked at them as being the police because that's the way they chose to take care of their family. You know what I'm saying? Okay, you got a job to do, and I got a job to do. So, but Fred wasn't like that. Fred wasn't like that.
Why do you think, what do you think fueled his hatred for the cops?
I don't know, Fred. He ain't bipolar. I don't know. He might be bipolar. I don't know, but Fred just didn't like police.
And so they really didn't like him either.
And I believe a lot of them cases Fred was catching back then. Most of them, I think they were free casing them. You know what I'm saying?
They were what?
Free casing them.
What does that mean?
Like just getting them cases, You might be around and they might walk anywhere, flying the dope, and it's okay, Fred, it's yours. It might be 5-6 more people out there.
What Fredrico and his close friends described to me was like a cat and mouse game between them and the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. On one night in July 1987, Fredrico was a passenger in a car that got pulled over in the 3rd District. It was close to his apartment. So he got out and he walked inside. He said he didn't think they were there for him, so he left. This audio is from an in-person interview with Fredrico in prison. You'll hear from that interview quite a bit in addition to the prison phone calls.
Guy said, come down and open the door. And I go down and open the door for the officer down at the door. I was like, what's up? He said, turn around. He pulled his gun out. He said, turn around, put your hands up. I threw my hands up. I said, yeah, what's up, man? He said, you under arrest. I said, under arrest for what? He said, you ran from me. I said, I didn't run from you. I said, I didn't even see you. Why would I run from you?
2 officers, Reuben Hammond and James Long, arrested Fredrico on the allegation of drug possession. They were patrolmen in the 3rd District. They worked the night shift, 11 to 7. I found some old news clips that mentioned the officers. One was from a story from January 1985 about how the officers tracked down a car break-in suspect by following tracks in the snow. They arrested that guy, and he was charged with stealing. Another from 1990 was about a missing man who was actually in the hospital with a head injury. His family had been looking for him for 2 weeks. Hammond ran a computer search with the last name, Roller. That helped figure out the man in the hospital and the missing man were one and the same. According to Fredrico, it was that night in July of '87 that tensions started between him and Hammond and Long. Although Fredrico did sell drugs at the time, he claimed that night he didn't have any. After another arrest later that month, Fredrico filed an internal affairs complaint against the officers with the police department.
And they beat me up. They was hitting me. Both of them was hitting me from each side of the car. One was on the other side, the other one was on the other side. And they was hitting me, poking me with the flash. They had a long flashlight. And they was poking me with the flashlight, and the other one was just hitting me across my leg. I had bruises on my leg, on my wrist, and on one of my fingers was jammed and whatnot. And they was just hitting me. And I was trying to protect myself. You're handcuffed, you're in the back of the seat, back seat of the police car. You can't do nothing but, try to curve up or cuddle up, like, where, go into a fetal position, so they wouldn't hurt you,
The internal affairs complaint Fredrico filed against Hammond and Long never went anywhere. It was deemed not sustained by the police department's internal review board. But the second arrest wasn't his last encounter with the officers. One of those encounters had another witness, Fredrico's then-girlfriend, Shervon Johnson. Fredrico and Shervon's brother had gotten into an argument at the apartment, and someone called the police for a peace disturbance. Fredrico and Shervon were arrested. They were in the 3rd District Jail at the same time in different cells. They both said while they were in there, Hammond and Long went up to Fredrico and said something to him. This is what Johnson remembered from that arrest.
Fred was in the first cell. I was all the way down on the end. And those 2 officers, they came to a cell. I'm listening. And they told him, they said, either we're going to send you to the penitentiary the rest of your life, or we're going to kill you. You know, and Fred said, you hear that, baby? And when he said that and I responded, you know, Fred said you could see the look on their face because they thought wasn't nobody back there but him. And I heard it, and I said, yeah, baby, I hear him like that, you know.
Fredrico's recollection of that arrest was similar. He specifically said the officers told him they were going to kill him. Johnson said it seemed like every interaction with the police, it was those 2 officers.
And they were always threatening him. They always threatened Fred every time they came. You know, and they talked to him so bad like he was a piece of dirt. You know, I don't care what he did or what y'all think. There's no way to talk to him and treat him and throwing him all around. And, you know, they did that all the time. All the time. I mean, we could be walking down the street with the baby or whatever. Here they come.
Fredrico went to trial in April of 1988 for possession of a controlled substance. It was what he got arrested for the previous July. Officers Hammond and Long testified, and so did Fredrico, and a jury acquitted him of the charge. Fredrico said both officers were in the courtroom when he was acquitted, and they exchanged some words after the verdict. And fair warning, there's some offensive language.
Hammond Long, they were still there with the assistant circuit attorney down there. And as a direct result of that, you know, Hammond blurted out. He said, you ain't gonna walk the streets or something. I say, fuck you. That's just what I said. I said, fuck you.
Was anybody else around to hear that comment
Well,
that he said to you?
my attorney heard it, and he told me just sit tight. I said, man, you heard what he said. I ain't gonna walk the street. I ain't gonna walk the street this summer. He said, sit tight. He kept patting me on my arm, on my hand, and told me to sit tight.
And he used the N-word when he said it.
Yeah,
in
he
the
said,
court.
You ain't gonna walk the street this summer.
Fredrico's attorney was a public defender named Andrew Hernandez. He retired from the office in 2000, and he died in 2009, so I couldn't talk to him about that instance or the rape trial. I contacted both Hammond and Long for this story. Hammond retired from the police department in 1997. Long retired in 2008. I went looking for them, assuming they probably still lived in the area. I wasn't able to reach Long by phone, but I found an address for him. So I went to his house to ask him, 1, if he even remembered Fredrico Lowe-Bey, and 2, if he would be willing to do an interview with me about this story. I pulled onto a quiet street of nice homes in a St. Louis suburb, peeking my head out of my car window to catch the correct address. I parked my car across the road and headed to the door. A small window next to the front door was open, letting fresh air roll in on a mild fall day. I rang the doorbell, and a small dog rushed to the door and started barking. A few moments later, a woman answered the door. I asked her if a James Long lived there, that I was a reporter hoping to talk to him about a man he investigated for a rape 37 years ago. The screen door was still closed, but I could see a man standing in the house. All I could see was an outline of a person. I couldn't make out what he looked like while I was standing in the sunlight, peering into a dimly lit house. And then he came to the door. I introduced myself, but it seemed like he already knew who I was and why I was there. I had left him a voicemail a few days prior, but he hadn't gotten back to me. And so I started asking him about Fredrico. He remembered the name and that he had arrested him, but he said he didn't remember much other than that. It was a long time ago, and he made it seem like there wasn't anything significant about Fredrico compared to other people he arrested or investigated. Our conversation that day only lasted a few minutes. I wanted the public to hear his side and to give him the chance to respond to what Fredrico was claiming. but he declined my request to do an interview for this story. I was able, though, to ask him some questions about specific allegations Fredrico made against him. Long adamantly denied having a vendetta against Fredrico. He denied ever threatening him with imprisonment or taking his life. He denied the courtroom exchange after the drug acquittal ever happened. And he denied that he ever set him up for a crime. I hadn't heard back from Hammond after trying over a few weeks to get in touch with him. But no more than an hour after I talked to Long, Hammond gave me a call. We talked for a few minutes about the case, and I asked him to do an interview as well. He said he was leaning towards no, but that he'd think about it and let me know. A few days later, he said he was willing to go on the record. He had never talked about the case publicly.
My name is Reuben, R-U-B-I-N. Last name is Hammond, H-A-M-A-N.
We met at the St. Louis Police Officers Association on Hampton in South St. Louis. A note about my interview with Hammond. Long was there when it happened. He sat at a table right next to us when the mics were on and the camera was rolling. He heard every question I asked Hammond and had another chance to go on the record, but he chose not to. Hammond, like Long, completely denied having a vendetta against Fredrico. Both he and Long painted a picture that was the complete opposite of what Fredrico, his former girlfriend, and friends had described to me. They weren't just denying that they hated him, they denied having it out for him at all. They claimed he was just another guy. What was your impression of the guy?
Not much. You know, just a regular person.
Nothing stood out per se, or?
No, not at all.
All these years later, Hammond said he didn't remember the internal affairs complaint Fredrico filed against him and Long. But that came out during the rape trial. According to trial transcripts, Fredrico's attorney asked him if he was aware Fredrico filed the complaint against him alleging misconduct, and he said yes. He claims that you guys had roughed him up during an arrest, and then he got released the next morning.
I mean, he might have got arrested. We might have arrested him.
Hammond told me if there was a complaint filed against him, he honestly didn't remember.
I seriously don't remember an internal affairs complaint.
Okay, so you don't remember the complaint, don't remember the arrest that was supposedly the point of the complaint.
I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I just don't remember it.
He also said he didn't remember the arrest where Fredrico and Shervon claimed they threatened Fredrico at the 3rd District Police Station.
I don't remember doing that.
You never
Now,
did?
that doesn't mean that the police didn't arrest Fredrico Lowe-Bey, his girlfriend, and her sister. That is, but I didn't arrest him.
Okay. Wasn't you?
If it was, I don't remember that one.
He said the premise sounded silly. Why would he threaten somebody over a peace disturbance?
For a peace disturbance. I don't remember locking them up, but how can you send a person to the penitentiary for life for a peace disturbance?
And then the courtroom exchange that Fredrico claimed happened after he was acquitted on the drug charge?
No, I did not do it, but common sense would say, why would I say something like that? If I would say it, why would I say it in the courtroom? So everybody, the prosecutors, defense attorneys, all the other people in court can hear me say it. It doesn't make any sense.
On the most important questions I had for Hammond, he insisted there was no foul play in the investigation of Fredrico for rape and sodomy. The two sides of the story here could not be more different. It starts to become a question of who you believe. He said, she said. Fredrico claims the police had it out for him, but these cops say they didn't, whatsoever. Hammond and Long's encounters with Fredrico only make up one part of this story. It's an important one, but there's a lot more to his claims of innocence than just how these cops treated him. The rest of this story is filled with twists that present more questions than answers. Once you think the dots start connecting, you find out more information that pokes a hole right through the narrative. If this is true, how can that be true? Why did someone say this and later on say something completely different? It's a complicated, frustrating case, whether he's guilty or not. In the next episode, I'll lay out the case against Fredrico Lowe-Bey. It hinged on one eyewitness's testimony of who she thought raped her in a dimly lit alley at 5 a.m. The prosecution would present it as a straightforward case of a victim identifying her perpetrator. A second look shows inconsistencies that are difficult to explain all these years later. Law enforcement thought they had enough for a case. So the night after the rape, they were knocking on Fredrico's door. They had an arrest warrant.
Boom, 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 boom. And I'm like, who the hell is that knocking on that door like that, you know?
You're like, well, we got you. We got you now. You're going to prison now.
Fredrico Lowe-Bey was under arrest, but not for selling drugs or stealing a car. This time, they were accusing him of a much more serious crime. That's next on Burden of Proof, one man's fight to show he's innocent. You can listen to new episodes every Thursday wherever you get your podcasts or on firstalerts4.com. This podcast is produced and voiced by me, Matt Woods. If you want to get in touch, send me an email, matthew.woods@kmov.com with 2 T's on the first name. This is a First Alert 4 original podcast.